This is the third in a three-part Blender video series that demonstrates how to make an animation of a robot dog. In the first video, we modeled the body of the dog. In the second video, we added rigging. In this third video, we'll be animating it. As part of this video, we'll be using Blender's Graph Editor, Dope Sheet, and NLA Editor. This is where we left off in the previous video. Let's start by adding a walk cycle. So verify that pose mode is selected. Then set the frame number to 1 if it's not set to that already. Now make sure that all of the bones are in their rest position by pressing A once or twice until all of the bones are selected. Then from the Pose menu, select Clear Transform and then All. Next, right-click a back foot bone to select it. Then hold down the Shift key and right-click the other back foot bone to add it to the selection. Then drag them back until there's only a slight bend in the knees. Now right-click a front foot bone to select it. Then hold down the Shift key and right-click the other front foot bone to add it to the selection. Then drag them back until there's only a slight bend in the knees. Next, we're going to offset the position of the right side feet. So right-click the back right foot bone to select it. Then hold down the Shift key and right-click the front right foot bone to add it to the selection. Then press 1 on the number pad for front view. One complete step will be 3 Blender units long, so let's move the right side feet half of that distance, which is 1.5 Blender units. So press G, then X, then 1.5, then Enter. This is the starting position of our walk cycle. We previously set the frame number to 1, so let's add a keyframe here. We want to include the other 2 foot bones, so hold down the Shift key and right-click them to add them to the selection. Then add a keyframe by pressing I and select Location, Rotation. All 4 feet will take a step in the same way, but they will step at different times. So we're going to set up keyframes for all 4 feet moving together, and then use the Dope Sheet later to shift them in time. A single step will require 10 frames to move, so set the frame number to 11, which is the end of the first step. Then move the feet on the x-axis by 3 Blender units, which is the distance of one step. So press G, then X, then 3, then Enter. It's okay that the legs come unattached from the feet. This will be corrected later. Now add a keyframe by pressing I and selecting Location, Rotation. Next, set the frame number to the middle of the step, which is frame number 6. Then move the feet up 1 Blender unit by pressing G, then Z, then 1, then Enter. Then press I and select Location, Rotation. Now let's add a rotation to the feet as they take a step. So set the frame number to 3. Then change the pivot point to individual origins to prevent the feet from rotating around the median point of the whole group. Then rotate on the y-axis by pressing R, then Y, then 15, then Enter. Then press I and select Location, Rotation. Now set the frame number to 9. Then rotate by pressing R, then Y, then -25, then Enter. Then press I and select Location, Rotation. Now when I scrub back and forth through the timeline, you can see how the feet move. We're done with the feet for now, so change the pivot point back to median point. Next, we're going to set up keyframes for the body bone, so set the frame number to 1. Then right-click the body bone to select it. Then move it down on the Z-axis by pressing G, then Z, then -0.5, then Enter. This is the starting position, so set a keyframe by pressing I and selecting Location, Rotation. Now set the frame number to 25, which is the end of a complete walk cycle. Then move the body on the x-axis by 3 Blender units, which is the distance of a walk cycle. So press G, then X, then 3, then Enter. Then press I and select Location, Rotation. Now when I scrub back and forth through the timeline, you can see how everything moves. Now we're going to open up the Graph Editor, Dope Sheet, and NLA Editor. So from the Screen Layout menu, select Animation. We don't need the window on the right, so drag the edge to the right. This is the Dope Sheet, and I'm going to reduce its size. This is the Graph Editor, and I'm going to adjust its size also. Now click on the menu at the bottom of the timeline and select NLA Editor. Next, move the mouse cursor into the 3D view window and press 5 on the number pad to switch to orthographic mode. As the body bone moves through a walk cycle, it speeds up at the beginning and slows down at the end. We want it to move at a constant rate so that it will move smoothly through multiple walk cycles. We can accomplish this by using the Graph Editor. The body bone is currently selected, so you can see the curves for it in the Graph Editor window. When the mouse cursor is in this window, you can pan the view by pressing the middle mouse button while dragging. You can zoom by using the scroll wheel. If you click this triangle, you can see a description of the curves. This red curve represents the location of the body bone along the x-axis. The bottom of the curve is where it speeds up and the top of the curve is where it slows down. To change this to a constant speed, make sure that the mouse cursor is in the Graph Editor window, then press A once or twice until all of the control points are selected. The points will turn orange when selected. Then from the Key menu, select Interpolation Mode and then Linear. Now the red line is straight, which represents a constant speed. When we set up the keyframes for the feet, we set them up together since they all move in the same way. But since they should not all move at the same time, we're going to use the Dope Sheet to shift them in time. The Dope Sheet shows when each keyframe occurs. So in the Dope Sheet, pan the view using the middle mouse button and zoom in using the scroll wheel. The diamonds represent the keyframes that we set. The 4 feet and body bones are all listed on the left. If you hold down the left mouse button, you can scrub through the timeline. The number at the bottom of the time cursor shows the current frame number. Now let's shift the timing of the feet. The timing of the dog's back left foot is correct, so it doesn't need to move. The front left foot should start moving 2 frames after the back foot, so right-click the front left foot bone to select it. You'll see it highlighted with light green in the Dope Sheet. These are the keyframes that will be moving first. Now with the mouse cursor over the diamonds, press A once or twice until all of the keyframes are deselected. The diamonds will turn white when they are deselected. Then press B for Border Select and select the keyframes for the selected foot bone. Then move them 2 frames to the right by pressing G, then 2, then Enter. A complete walk cycle is 24 frames, so the back right foot should move half of a walk cycle or 12 frames later than the back left foot. So right-click the back right foot bone to select it. Then put the mouse cursor over the keyframes and press A to deselect all. Then press B for Border Select and select the keyframes for the selected foot bone. Then move them 12 frames to the right by pressing G, then 12, then Enter. The front right foot will start moving 2 frames after the back foot, so we'll move it by 14 frames. So right-click the front right foot bone to select it. Then put the mouse cursor over the keyframes and press A to deselect all. Then press B for Border Select and select the keyframes for the selected foot bone. Then move them 14 frames to the right by pressing G, then 14, then Enter. Now when I scrub through the timeline, you can see how the feet move. Now we're going to set keyframes for all 4 feet and the body at the start and end of the walk cycle. We're doing this so that the locations and rotations will be defined throughout the entire walk cycle. So move to frame 1. Then right-click the body bone to select it. Then shift right-click all 4 foot bones to add them to the selection. Then press I and select Location, Rotation. Now move to frame 25. Then press I and select Location, Rotation. Next, we're going to add some personality to the walk by adding more keyframes to the body bone. So right-click the body bone so that it's the only bone selected. Then press 3 on the number pad for right side view. Now move to the middle of the walk cycle, which is frame number 13. Then press I and select Location, Rotation. This is what the walk cycle currently looks like from the right side. Next, move to frame number 7. Then rotate on the x-axis by pressing R, then X, then -5, then Enter. Then move on the z-axis by pressing G, then Z, then 0.3, then Enter. Then move on the y-axis by pressing G, then Y, then -0.3, then Enter. Now press I and select Location, Rotation. Next, move to frame number 19. Then rotate on the x-axis by pressing R, then X, then 5, then Enter. Then move on the z-axis by pressing G, then Z, then 0.3, then Enter. Then move on the y-axis by pressing G, then Y, then 0.3, then Enter. Now press I and select Location, Rotation. This is what the walk cycle looks like now. Here it is from a different angle. I can also scrub the timeline from the NLA Editor. You'll notice that after reaching frame number 25, that the animation stops since there are no more keyframes defined. But we can use the graph editor to cause the walk cycle to keep repeating past frame 25. To do that, move the mouse cursor into the graph editor window and press N to open the Properties panel. Then left-click the X location channel to select it. If your Blender version has a Modifiers tab, then click it. Then in the Modifiers section, click the Add Modifier button and select Cycles. Then from the After menu, select Repeat with Offset. Now if I scrub the timeline, you'll see that the body bone keeps moving past frame 25. But after frame 25, it doesn't rock back and forth. So we're going to copy the Cycles modifier and add it to some more curves. So click the Copy Modifiers button. Then left-click the Y location channel to select it. Then click the Add Copied Modifier button to add the modifier to the curve. Then left-click the Z location channel to select it and click the Add Copied Modifier button. Then left-click the X rotation channel and then the Add Copied Modifier button. Now when I scrub the timeline, the body bone keeps moving past frame 25 while rocking back and forth. Next, we're going to add the copied modifier to some foot curves. So right-click the back right foot to select it. Then in the Graph Editor window, click the triangle to expand the channels. We're going to add the modifier to 3 curves. So left-click the X location channel and then click the Add Copied Modifier button. Then left-click the Y location channel and then click the Add button. Then left-click the Z rotation channel and then click the Add button. Now we need to repeat this for the other 3 feet. So right-click the back left foot to select it. Then expand the channels. Then left-click the X location channel and then the Add button. Then left-click the Y location channel and then the Add button. Then left-click the Z rotation channel and then the Add button. Next, right-click the front right foot to select it. Then expand the channels. Then left-click the X location channel and then the Add button. Then left-click the Y location channel and then the Add button. Then left-click the Z rotation channel and then the Add button. Now right-click the front left foot to select it. then expand the channels. Then left-click the X location channel and then the Add button. Then left-click the Y location channel and then the Add button. Then left-click the Z rotation channel and then the Add button. Now when I scrub the timeline, the complete walk cycle keeps repeating after frame 25. We're done with the Properties panel, so you can press N to close it. I'm going to save what I have so far. Now that we've applied the modifier to all of the curves, we can use the NLA Editor to give us more control. So press this button to turn our animation into an action strip. This button may look different in older versions of Blender. You'll notice that the Dope Sheet and Graph Editor are now empty. If you want to make changes to either of these two editors, then move the mouse cursor into the NLA Editor window and press Tab to enter Tweak Mode. When you're done with the changes, press Tab again to exit Tweak Mode. Now if I scrub along the timeline, you'll see that the animation stops after frame 25. So while in the NLA Editor window, press N to open the Properties panel. There are two sections that we'll be using: the Active Strip section and the Action Clip section. In the Action Clip section, the start frame is set to 1 and the end frame is set to 25. Change the end frame to 150. Now when I scrub the timeline, it keeps walking until frame 150. Now let's split the action strip in two. So move the time cursor to frame 49, which is at the end of the second walk cycle. Then from the Edit menu, select Split Strips. Now press and hold the right mouse button on this action strip and drag it to the right. Then release the right mouse button and left-click to drop it in place. Now when I scrub along the timeline, you'll see that the animation stops after the first action strip and then continues again at the second one. Now we're going to make the dog stand up and then rock back and forth. So move to frame 49. Next, hold down the Shift key and right-click the other three foot bones and the body bone to add them to the selection. Then set a keyframe by pressing I and selecting Location Rotation. Then use the middle mouse button and pan the Dope Sheet view until you can see the keyframes that we just set. You'll notice in the NLA Editor that the new keyframes are on a new track. Now press 1 on the number pad for front view. Then right-click the body bone so that it's the only bone selected. Then move 5 frames to the right. You can use the keyboard to move the time cursor by using the left and right arrow keys. So I'll just press the right arrow key 5 times to move to frame 54. Next, rotate on the Y-axis by pressing R, then Y, then -40, then Enter. Then move on the X-axis by pressing G, then X, then -3, then Enter. Then press I and select Location Rotation. Now, right-click one of the front foot bones to select it. Then hold down the Shift key and right-click the other one to add it to the selection. Then move on the Z-axis by pressing G, then Z, then 3, then Enter. Then move on the X-axis by pressing G, then X, then -0.5, then Enter. Then rotate on the Y-axis by pressing R, then Y, then -70, then Enter. Then press I and select Location Rotation. Now use the arrow key and move 5 frames to the right to frame 59. Then right-click the body bone to select it. Then rotate on the Y-axis by pressing R, then Y, then -20, then Enter. Then move on the X-axis by pressing G, then X, then -1, then Enter. Then move on the Z-axis by pressing G, then Z, then 0.8, then Enter. Then press I and select Location Rotation. Next, right-click one of the front foot bones to select it. Then hold down the Shift key and right-click the other one to add it to the selection. Then move on the Z-axis by pressing G, then Z, then 4, then Enter. Then move on the X-axis by pressing G, then X, then minus 0.5, then Enter. Then press I and select Location Rotation. This is what it looks like so far. Next, we're going to make the dog rock back and forth. So right-click the body bone to select it. Then move 5 frames to the right to frame 64. Then press 3 on the number pad for right side view. Now rotate on the X-axis by pressing R, then X, then minus 3, then Enter. Then move on the Y-axis by pressing G, then Y, then minus 0.5, then Enter. Now press I and select Location Rotation. Next, right-click one of the front foot bones to select it. Then hold down the Shift key and right-click the other one to add it to the selection. Then press 3 on the number pad for right side view. Now move them on the Y-axis by pressing G, then Y, then 1, then Enter. Then press I and select Location Rotation. Now move 5 frames to the right to frame 69. Then move the bones on the Y-axis by pressing G, then Y, then minus 2, then Enter. Then press I and select Location Rotation. Now right-click the body bone to select it. Then press 3 on the number pad for right side view. Then rotate on the X-axis by pressing R, then X, then 6, then Enter. Then move on the Y-axis by pressing G, then Y, then 1, then Enter. Now press I and select Location Rotation. So far, during this section of the animation, the dog stands up and then rocks back and forth. Now we're going to duplicate some of the keyframes in reverse order to position the dog back down on all 4 feet. We'll duplicate the keyframes using the dope sheet. The dog starts standing at frame 49 and finishes at frame 59. So we'll start by duplicating the keyframes at frame 59. So put the mouse cursor over the keyframes and press A to deselect all. Then press B for border select and select all of the keyframes at frame 59. Then duplicate and move them by 15 frames by pressing Shift D, then 15, then Enter. Now we'll duplicate the next set of keyframes. So in the dope sheet, press A to deselect all, then press B and select all of the keyframes at frame 54. Then duplicate and move by 25 frames by pressing Shift D, then 25, then Enter. Now we'll duplicate one more set of keyframes. So in the dope sheet, press A to deselect all. Then press B and select all of the keyframes at frame 49. Then duplicate and move by 35 frames by pressing Shift D, then 35, then Enter. The solid orange lines indicate places where the keyframes have not changed. In this case, it shows us that there is no movement of the back feet between frames 49 and 84. Now let's see what this animation sequence looks like. First, the dog stands up, then rocks back and forth, and then returns down on all 4 feet. This is what it looks like from another angle. Next, we're going to turn this animation sequence into an action strip. So down in the NLA Editor, click this button. Now that we've turned it into an action strip, we can use the Properties panel to speed it up or slow it down. Earlier, when we changed the end frame value of the walk cycle, it didn't change the speed of the animation. Instead, it changed the number of walk cycles. If you go to the Active Strip section, you can set the strip extents start and end frames. These values control the speed of the animation. We're going to slow it down, so right-click the action strip so that it's the only strip that's selected. Then change the end frame from 84 to 99. This will lengthen the strip and slow it down. This is what it looks like. After the end of this action strip, there is no movement until we reach the last action strip. So let's move the last action strip so that there is no gap between the strips. So press and hold the right mouse button on it and drag it to the left. Then release the right mouse button and left click to drop it in place. So let's look at the whole animation. The dog starts walking, then stands up, then back down, then continues walking. The last frame is 200. Now switch to the default screen layout and set the frame number to 1. Then make sure that pose mode is selected. The root bone can be used to set the direction that the dog will move. For this animation, I'm going to use the root bone in its current position, but I want to show you what would happen if I were to move it. So for example, I'll select the root bone and rotate it on the Z-axis, and then move it to the side. The dog will now start from a new location in a new direction. Depending on how I rotate it, I can even make it walk uphill. I'm going to use the root bone's original direction, so I'll use Ctrl-Z to undo the changes. Next, let's set up the camera view, so press 0 on the number pad. This is the view looking through the camera. I'll zoom in a little. Now I'm going to lock the camera to the view. To do that, press N to open the Properties panel and put a check mark next to Lock Camera to View. Then press N again to close the Properties panel. Now I can zoom, pan, and rotate while looking through the camera. Now I'm going to set the camera view position, but I want the dog to be standing when I do this. That way, the dog will stay in the camera view when it stands during the animation. So I'll set the frame number to 65. Now I'll set up the camera view that I want to use. Now let's see what the animation looks like from this vantage point. Next, let's make some changes to the floor. So right-click it to select it. Then scale it down in size on the Y-axis by pressing S, then Y, then 0.4, then Enter. Then scale it up in size on the X-axis by pressing S, then X, then 5, then Enter. Now we'll add some thickness to it. So press Tab for edit mode. Then press A once or twice until the whole floor is selected. Then press E to extrude, pull it down a little, and then left click. Then press Tab to return to object mode. Next we're going to make some changes to the floor material. So click the Material button and then select the metal material. Then click the plus button to duplicate it and name it Floor. Now switch to the Compositing screen layout. If the 3D view window is not in rendered view, then switch to rendered view. Now set the roughness value of the white glossy shader to 0.1. Next we're going to add a texture. So press Shift A and select Texture and then Brick Texture. Connect the color output to the white glossy shader's color input. Then set the scale to 50. To give the texture some depth, connect the color output to the displacement input. The brick texture allows 3 colors to be set, so set the top color to a hex value of E7, D1, B9. Then set the middle color to a hex value of 72675B. Leave the bottom color set to black. Now return to the default screen layout. This is what it looks like in rendered view while looking through the camera. The surface of the floor looks dark, so we're going to add another light source and set its direction so that it will brighten up the floor. So I'll switch back to solid view. Now find the lamp in the outliner and select it. We're going to duplicate it, so move the mouse cursor into the 3D view window and press Shift-D, then drag it to the side and left click. Since we're using a sun lamp, its position doesn't matter, so all we need to do is change the direction that it's pointing. We'll use the Properties panel to set the direction, so press N to open it. I'll switch to rendered view so that we can see the changes as they're made. Now set the Z rotation value to 320. The floor is now brighter and we can see more light reflecting off its surface. The default X and Y rotation values are good, so I'm not going to change them. You may want to verify that you have the same default values. Now press N to close the Properties panel. Next, let's change the background color. So click the World button and set the color to a hex value of 222222. Now let's finish setting up the animation. The animation is going to be 200 frames long, so set the end frame value to 200. Now click the Render button and then open the sampling section. I'm going to set the number of render samples to 200. The larger this value is, the better the final animation will look, but the longer it will take to render. Sometimes you can get unwanted bright speckles in the rendered image. These are sometimes referred to as fireflies. To help prevent this, I'm going to set the clamp indirect value to 1. Now come up to the output section. This is where you set the directory where your animation will be saved. Click on this button and select a directory. Next, click here to set the file format. There are multiple movie formats that you can choose from. I'm going to use OGG Theora. Now we're ready to render the animation, but I'm going to save the project first. It's a good idea to save the project before rendering in case something goes wrong during the rendering process. To render the animation, click on the Animation button. If you want to stop the rendering process before it's done, you can press the Escape key, or you can click the X next to the Render Progress bar. Now I'll pause the video until it's done. The animation is done rendering now. It took my computer about an hour and 15 minutes to render. This is the final frame that was rendered. If you want to return to the previous view, you can click this button and select 3D View. To view the animation, go to the Render menu and click on Play Rendered Animation, or you can press Ctrl F11. The animation will play through to the end and then start back at the beginning again. Now if you open up Windows File Explorer or something equivalent, you can navigate to your movie file. Now assuming that you have a video player that will play the movie format that you specified, you can now play your video. I've set up this player to repeat the video in a loop so that it will keep playing. Well, that concludes this video. Thanks for watching, and please subscribe and leave a comment.